Hello, everybody. That's my Chuck impression. Welcome to JavaScript Jabber. I am Steve Edwards, the host with the face for radio and the voice for being a mime, but you're stuck with me today since Chuck's not here because he had something better to do. With me on our panel, we have the man in the purple room, Mr. AJ O'Neill. How you doing, AJ?
Yo, coming at you live from a shave and a haircut.
Yes, we were just discussing that with the haircut, AJ is looking more, I think the term we used was distinguished, especially with the gray around the temples and stuff. So you can see that in the video. We've got a long way to go to catch up with me in terms of gray, but I hide all mine by shaving it. Anyway, also coming to us live from Tel Aviv, Mr. Dan Shapir. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing fine with lots of gray.
Lots of gray.
Hardly anything but gray.
Right.
But unlike AJ, not a button-down shirt, rather just a T-shirt from warm and sunny Tel Aviv. Here I am.
Dan is like, you got the gray, show it loud, show it proud.
Exactly.
And our very, very special guest, well, all our guests are very special, but another special guest is Mr. Noam Rosenthal. How you doing, Noam?
Doing great. How are you?
Good. Before we dive into our topic of the day, I want to give people a little background on who you are, what you do, why you're famous, and why people should give you money.
For the last question, because why not? But
good answer. Very good.
Yeah. So I work currently at Google, Chromium team, working on web standards in a big-ish team where our charter or role is to make navigation experiences on the web better and smoother and nicer, and make the web better for everyone. That's why I joined this team. I actually started my career as a web developer. It was 25 years ago. And yeah, just about 25 years ago. Kind of stayed on that wheel until I got this opportunity to go into the browser and fix things in there. And I was always passionate about making the web fast for everyone and better. So after also being at Wix and meeting Dan there, working together a lot, I got back to browser development, and after some freelance work, I'm at Google, and I'm happy to be involved in standards and shaping the API that everybody uses, hopefully, and also bringing my background as a web developer into that, into development of browsers. So,
yeah. Cool. So can you give us a little background of who this Google is? I haven't heard of them before. No, I'm kidding. I kid. Really, I kid. So the topic of the day has been one of the more recently released features in CSS, the View Transitions API. And for those of you who are in the View community, no, this is not VUE. This is VIEW, as in viewing things on your page. So why don't you start out and give us a little background as to, I guess, how this all came about. I know in the past we've talked about other people that have been working on this for years, so it's certainly not a recent development, been in the works for a while. So what's the history of the View Transitions API?
So actually, this is a shout out to Jake Archibald, who dreamt this, I think, about 7 years ago. Started has a lot of iterations of spec to do something that does what we're doing now with CSS View Transition. The idea is that up until now, when you talk about animations on the web, the best you could do natively with browser APIs is transition several properties of the same elements at the same time, like transition opacity and move the element around, transform, and all that, or maybe do something with keyframes. And if you needed anything more complicated than that, you'd have to go, for example, to WebGL, to Canvas, Um, you had to do things that were, even for things that are as simple as sliding the whole screen from one page to another. You'd have to use very complicated things like React transitions that create both pages in the DOM and then make the transition. Those things never really worked well. Um, also, at Wix, we had like this quite complex system for whole page transitions that is very basic in what it can do, and it's very difficult to make it perform.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up because, like you mentioned, both of us worked at Wix.
Mhm.
And for those of in our audience who don't know, Wix is a drag and drop website builder, which means that you build your website by just, dragging things around and right clicking on things and enabling and disabling all sorts of properties on them. And in terms of the way that it works and what it can do, it was really very inspired by the old Flash system of being able to and to do a lot of visually pleasing things. And obviously one of the things that they wanted to support from the get-go is all sorts of transitions. If you're moving between pages in a website, to be able to transition between the pages kind of like you do in let's say in a PowerPoint presentation. Or if a person hovers over something, then to do some sort of animation on transition with that sort of thing, all sorts of scroll transitions and stuff like that. And I remember the people who were working on it, and it was such a huge challenge for them to actually implement it, because one of the biggest challenges that people don't really think about is that you kind of need to keep both the start state and the end state in the DOM simultaneously. So, for example, to create also a page kind of transition, you effectively have to have essentially both pages loaded at the same time, let's say, and then create some sort of transition from one page to the other. Otherwise, it just can't work in when you build it in that way. And that was really, really hard to do, because if you think about, let's say, building a web page in React, and you've got the virtual DOM or the component tree for page A, and you build the component tree for page B, you don't have A and B in the VDOM at the same time. It's really difficult to do. So yes, it placed a big burden on the developers to be able to implement it. I remember a lot of hacks, a lot of performance issues related to that, a lot of buggy code. It was just really difficult to get it to do the right thing. Are you remembering the same things that I am, Noam?
Yes, absolutely. Probably. Um, I joined Wix a little after you, but still, there was always issues with that. And Wix is a company that invested in this a lot. For other companies, probably just like gave up on it.
Yeah, one of the reasons that Wix kind of started as an SPA was the fact that it was really the only way to properly implement transitions
Yeah.
between pages at the time. Now Wix has other reasons to be SPA. Other frameworks have other reasons to be SPA. But back in the day, that was a big motivation, because otherwise you just couldn't get that.
I think I'm not against SPAs as an ideology, uh, but some people are. But I feel that people should choose between SPA and MPA or that kind of architecture, not because of constraints that come from the web platform. Like that, our role as the web platform is to reduce those constraints. Then people can make their choices based on other things, ergonomics, how they build it, some performance things, and where they maintain states. I see SPA as great for uh, productivity style apps, things that are app heavy, for example.
Dashboards.
Yeah, and maybe MPA for more like content website, and there are a lot of things that are in the middle. Um, But anyway,
Yeah,
the,
just to finish on that point, though, the funny thing is that, like I said, you kind of needed to be SPA in order to be able to implement transitions. But the reality was that implementing transitions was often so challenging that most SPAs just didn't do it. So theoretically they could, but practically they didn't. Most SPAs, when you navigated, it looked exactly like an MPA, maybe faster, but that's about it.
yep. So going from what you said about needing to have the two states of the view, let's call that the old and new states of the view. This is exactly what the CSS view transition does internally. So it's a short explanation of how it works. When you start a view transition, we take the current state of affairs, what you have right now in the DOM. We capture images of the elements that you say participate in the transition. Then you tell us, the developer tells the browser when it's time to capture the new state. Then we do the same for the participating elements in the new state. And then think about it as having a whole bunch of image pairs. Like you have images that represent the old state, images that represent the new state. We match them by name, and then we have a state of the browser where we have a bunch of images in pseudo elements, and we can run CSS on them, animate them in any way we want.
So basically, what you're saying is that rather than trying to deal with the complication of maintaining two DOM trees inside the session at the same time, you instead deal with it by you looking at it basically as just a collection of images that you can apply all sorts of image transformations on instead. So you're really working with bitmaps rather than with DOM elements.
Correct.
Very cool. Very interesting.
Which means that during the transition, for example, those elements are not live. Like if you have a 1 second transition, let's say, or let's say if you have a transition that takes 10 seconds, and one of the elements you're animating is a video, you're not going to see the video running during this time. If you have an input, you can't type text into it and the text will update. A view transition is a morphing of two image collections into each other with certain rules, if you want.
So, for example, another example would be, let's say, a link that if you try to click on a link inside the view transition, it won't work because it's not the actual link or text, it's just the bitmap of that text.
Correct. This is a visual effect, which is limited in a way, but also what makes it possible.
Very interesting. And how do you control, like you said that you break, it's not like one big bitmap into another big bitmap of the entire screen. Rather, you said it's a collection of bitmaps.
Right.
How do you specify that collection? How do you tell the browser, this part of the screen should be one bitmap, this, I don't know, maybe the menu should, the header and menu should be one bitmap, the footer should be another, and so forth.
This all works with the name matching. So when we capture the old state, we set in CSS names for elements that we want to participate in the animation. And those are the elements that get captured.
So these names, are they distinct from component IDs, from like CSS class names or stuff like that? They're distinct from those?
Yeah, they're defined inside CSS. They're not in the DOM.
Oh, I understand.
It's more similar to containers when you need container queries and you can name, or to animation keyframe names. It's an internal CSS naming thing.
So the DOM itself is wholly, just to clarify to our listeners, again, if they don't know, the browsers actually maintain two kind of distinct but related. And again, Noam, feel free to correct me because you're, I think, more of an expert on this than I am. The browser maintains like two, let's call it distinct trees of objects, you might say. One is the DOM, which represents the HTML elements, and one is the CSS OM, which represents the CSS. And these are kind of merged together to build the render tree or something like that. And you're saying, if I understand you correctly, that the whole view transition thing lives wholly within the CSS side of things.
You can say that the DOM, in the end, what matters here is that we resolve the style of a particular element using all the CSS rules, all the selectors and media queries, all the nice things in CSS. We end up resolving the current style of a DOM element, and in that resolved style, like how we resolve whether it has a certain font or color, we also resolve whether it has a view transition name, which means it will participate in the view transition.
And what happens if two things have the same name?
We abort the transition right now.
Oh, you abort the transition.
Skip the transition. There are thoughts about this for the future to make it a little more flexible, but for now, names have to be unique within the context of a particular transition.
So you look at the names in the original state, you look at the name at the end state. Names that match, you can specify the animation between them in the CSS, and that's what happens, more or less?
More or less. So all this works with pseudo elements. So
could you explain to our listeners what pseudo elements are? I think that maybe many listeners don't actually know what that is.
Sure. So pseudo elements are elements that are visual but do not exist in the DOM. So if you just looked at the HTML, you wouldn't see them. But they have some representation visually and sometimes in terms of interaction. A good example is the parts of inputs. For example, there's, I think it's a pseudo element or is it a pseudo class?
There's the before and after, I think, right?
Those are classics. So, for example, the before and after pseudo elements, you can define that a particular div or whatever it is would have additional text or image after or before its regular content. And that text or image is not, if you just look at the HTML, you wouldn't see it, but it's there visually for users because it's defined as style.
I kind of joke that with the DOM, you can inject CSS into the DOM. Pseudo elements are kind of like the other way around in a way. It's like for the CSS to inject stuff into the DOM.
In a way, yes. It's a way to inject content that doesn't have a semantic meaning, but only a visual or style meaning. And like you don't need the screen readers to know about the pseudo elements, for example.
So how do you use pseudo elements in the context of view transitions?
So the way this works is that during the transition, after we captured both states, we create a tree of pseudo elements, which are basically the images. Some of them are the images, and they have some sort of hierarchy. So each two images that match names are in a pair of images. And we have a pseudo element for the whole transition. So this allows some sort of orchestration, like a big stage of not your DOM, not your page, but the transition itself.
So in that way, you can, because you're using a pseudo element, you can specify the transition animation in the same way that you would specify transition animations for regular DOM objects in a lot of ways?
In exactly those ways. You can use any type of CSS of a web animation that you want, either the web animation API or CSS animation, or moving them yourself. So yeah, the idea is that when the transition is active, what you actually have is like a fake or a pseudo DOM hierarchy on top of your regular DOM, and you can style it in any existing way you want.
Now, in order to use this goodness, do I need to be an MPA, an SPA, either, neither? What's
So in version 1, which is what's shipped today in Chrome, I wouldn't say you need to be an SPA, but those transitions work inside a particular document. So if you want to have a transition between pages and you're an MPA, you currently can't do that. This is the current state, and this is what I'm working on in my everyday work, is specifying how this would work across pages
so for
or
now?
segments.
So for now, if I want to view transitions, I still need to be an SPA in a way like I used to. It's just that my life is a lot easier because I don't need to do all the heavy lifting. Instead, I can more or less just do it in pure CSS.
And hopefully by the time you're ready to ship whatever it is you're doing, we'll already have MPA working. So it's in the works.
And
Yeah.
yeah, that's really cool. If we can actually do it between pages, that opens up, a lot of possibilities. By the way, in this context, I understand that the recently released Astro framework
Yep.
has built-in support for that, and I don't know how familiar you are with it.
A bit.
So a few questions on that. First of all, my understanding was that Astro is predominantly MPA. So if you're saying that view transitions are currently SPA, how does Astro work with that?
It works in SPA mode for Astro.
So Astro is able to reuse
Yeah.
something that hasn't been quite officially released yet, or something like that.
No, they use the SPA mode. They use the Astro has a mode where the page updates without switching to the new one.
So it's kind of like, I understand. So it's kind of like mocking an SPA in an MPA environment enough for the transitions to work, something like that.
I think just Astro has an SPA mode. I don't know if they call it that, but
Okay.
you can configure Astro to not update to not refresh the page. It's just more like their mental model is very MPA-ish, but it doesn't mean that but they do have the whole thing where they capture forms and the links and stuff.
Okay.
So one quick question for those beer drinkers out there: is any IPA support?
And my second question is, it sounds like you were going for a model where JavaScript is wholly not required for it, which, despite the fact that we're a JavaScript podcast, I'm super happy whenever you can do something sophisticated in the browser and not need JavaScript in order to do it.
Yeah, we love
Uh,
jabbing at JavaScript.
yeah, more Jabber, less JavaScript. I think it was
Yeah,
Bruce Lawson who said that.
yeah.
Anyway, so my question then is, why do I even need framework support for it? Isn't it just CSS that I use regardless of whatever framework I'm using?
Yes and no. More no than yes. So the CSS, yes, but remember I said there's like a life cycle of when do you capture the old state and the new state, and this has to be in a framework called. This has to be integrated into the router of the framework. So
Hmm.
the router is usually the piece in the framework that knows what like, let's say if you're doing like full page transitions, the router is what knows this is the old state, now I'm in the new state. We don't know that. It's like the user code has to say that. And people who use frameworks usually don't exactly know it themselves. They rely on the framework to do all this stuff for them.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is that in an MPA, in a SPA type environment, the concept of navigation is not super well defined. It's not exactly obvious when you left the previous page and when you've fully arrived in the next page. And you're using a JavaScript based API in order to indicate that. Am
Yep.
I correct in my understanding?
Yeah. Also in MPA, there is no concept of the navigation is ended. There is no concept of
Yeah,
you're in the new page.
correct.
That is a UX concept and a content. It's a concept that whoever built the content can decide. It's not content that the browser can decide for them, for
Yeah,
anybody.
that's kind of the thing about performance is that you measuring web page load performance is that you're never sure when page is fully loaded, if
Yeah.
ever.
So it's even more so for SPA. So the only thing we can do is you tell us when you're done, kind of thing. And
Unload.
sure.
I'm joking.
And then you have a restore from BF cache. And okay,
Exactly. Yeah, I know. I know.
it's anyway. We had like a lot of conversations, philosophical conversations about when is navigation done, and the answer is pretty much it depends on the content.
It's kind of slightly related to, I think, work that Yoav Weiss is doing. We actually spoke about this with Barry Pollard a while
Yeah,
back about trying to measure soft navigations in in single page applications,
yeah,
and it directly goes to this whole issue of understanding when pages transition.
yes. I think that's what you have is doing is a separate problem because you don't really care when navigation is done. You just want to measure when the next largest contentful pane appeared on the screen, or what is the cumulative layer shift after soft navigation. So you don't need to be done for any of that.
Hmm.
Also, soft navigations are heuristic, and here we can't really be heuristic because it's like people designing their pages. We want to be clear about exactly what's going on.
Hmm.
Um, so in the MPA world, this is a little bit more complicated even because you could be transitioning to a page that is not fully loaded and is progressively loading chunks of HTML from the network.
Yeah, especially in these days of React Server components and stuff like that.
Yes. So how do we know when it's okay to start a transition, and what do we do until then? What do we do if it times out? So those are a lot of questions we're trying to answer today.
I could even foresee a situation in which you may want to even break that transition into parts, like transition
Maybe.
some stuff and then continue. Like I always make that same joke that how can you tell if a web application is or a web page is a modern web page that it has multiple spinners instead of one big spinner.
Yeah.
So if you may want to transition each spinner separately. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, we're not there yet, but we'd be happy to start with a full page transition across documents. But there are some proposals for later about doing this in parts, etc. It's not easy problem to solve.
So I'm looking at the docs because I've been listening to this or people talk about it and reading some of the docs and so on. And Dan, you asked a question earlier about how you're trying to do it with just CSS. So, I've looked at transitions trying to do them before, and it's like, okay, when I have a couple hours, I'll come back and devote to try to do a transition because you're talking about keyframes and lots of other elements. But it makes sense that because you're in the DOM, you also can manipulate with JavaScript, right? You can. I was reading, for instance, in the docs that if there's a specific element that you want to transition different than other elements, I believe there's some JavaScript methods that you can use to do that. So because you're in the DOM, JavaScript's there, right? You can use it. You just don't have to use it if you want to do some basic view transitions. Is that a correct statement?
I would say that if you don't want to use CSS to transition to generate the whole animation, you can use the Web Animation API, which is JavaScript based and
Well, no,
animated.
what I was saying is it possible to do it just with CSS and not have to use any JavaScript, but you can use JavaScript to augment and do custom things? Or am I not
If
understanding that correctly?
for same document, no. For same document, you need JavaScript to at least give us the cues to when the transition starts and ends, or to when to capture the old state and new state.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the basic thing for same document. For multi-page applications, you wouldn't need JavaScript. You can do everything with pure CSS. Is our intention.
So to what? Like notice that all the named components are there and just trigger the animation, something like that?
We will have a new kind of navigation behavior rule. We're still bike shedding the name
Bike
that
shedding.
says, yeah, that says that if that is kind of opt in to view transition in the same between the two pages, and both documents need to say, I'm okay with transitioning with having a view transition to the next page, or to all the same origin pages, or some URL pattern or something like that.
So I mentioned before that Vue 3, which recently came out, not Vue, sorry, that
Astro.
Astro 3 that recently came out introduced support for this. And they were, in fact, it was one of their biggest, let's call it user facing features, and one that they were heavily promoting because it's just visually so cool. And it certainly got a lot of people, chatting, at least in my neck of the woods on X, Twitter, whatever you call it. That because there was a lot of chatter there, because like I said, theoretically you could have done this before on, React, Next, Remix, whatever, but practically nobody, or hardly anybody, was doing it because it was so challenging. And all of a sudden, Astro, came out with a whole bunch of super cool demos. I remember somebody building the Netflix like app, and it looked really like a native mobile app in all, the way that it transitioned between parts. And it was super cool on one hand, but on the other hand, I was thinking, hey, this is really nice, but it's actually a platform feature, not so much an Astro feature.
I think one of the strengths a framework could show to its users, developers, is we don't block you from using new platform features.
Yeah,
I'm totally serious about this. If a framework has some opinionated things in it that make it so that it's difficult for you to use a new platform feature, it's a selling point to the other frameworks.
can you give a concrete example of something like that?
Yeah, in Next.js, which nothing against them. I know they're we're asking people to vote for the feature. Like they're supportive and we're working with them. But I tried very hard to use CSS view transitions with Next.js. And I found that without uh, patching Next.js itself, it's almost impossible.
That's interesting. Can you like give a, high level explanation of why that is?
And well, for the new app router thing, right? And Next.js just did um, this big refactor to their API.
Yeah, the app
Um,
folder and React Server components.
so, like I said, to make this work with a framework, you need to hook into the router of the framework and understand when a route change starts and when it ends. In the old Next.js, they had hooks for that. And now that they switched to all the new React 18 stuff, they removed those hooks because it doesn't work with the new React model. Um, so to make this work, you need to hook into how the router works internally. There's no API for it. What you could do is wrap the Next.js router, but then you also need to wrap Next.js links because they access the router internally. So you end up with kind of a Frankenext kind of thing where you have your own links and your own router on top of their router and links, and like it's not. I wouldn't go down that route. It's not great.
Yeah, the routers in multiple frameworks are becoming like kind of like you said, like Frankenstein's monster sort of thing. Because they're running stuff on the client side, they're running stuff on the server side. The whole thing works asynchronously, and additional content is being downloaded as it can be downloaded as it becomes available, and yeah, it's so so a lot of it took me a while to understand, for example, that one of the key things about React Server Components is that a router running on the client side instigates component rendering on the server side.
Right.
So and then the response is kind of streamed down, which is really nuts.
Yeah, the whole thing is quite complicated at this time, um, for better or for worse. But I think all this stuff came because of actual user need, um, and there are all kinds of solutions, and natural selection of developers brought us to some state where some things are more popular than others.
So it's not just the React core team being bored.
I think developer preference in framework teams and in web platform teams, etc., definitely plays a part in all this.
Oh, for sure.
All of the things play a part together, but I think it would be a bit superficial to say that the React core team were bored, so they created something complicated. It's like I say that although things play a part together, and it's not easy for like today's complicated web apps to build routers that perform and work well by yourself.
Oh yeah, a lot of things that we are currently doing with routers are things that nobody dreamt about a decade ago, for sure.
Mhm.
Uh, Type safe router. Who was thinking about type safety in front-end developers 10 years ago?
Right.
So I'm totally with you on that. I also think like I totally agree with your statement that things kind of get a life of their own. Like you make certain architectural decisions in one point in time, and things need and evolve. So when React was created back in 2013, what is it, a decade ago? You know, they weren't thinking about React Server components. So yeah, they had to come up with solutions that worked with various architectural decisions that they made at certain points in time in the past.
Or as I say, if things were different, they wouldn't be the same.
Yeah. So you were saying that the big thing that you're currently doing in terms of view transitions is working on adding support for multi-page applications.
Yes.
Anything else that needs to be done?
Yeah, I actually um, came back 3 days ago from something called TPAC. TPAC is
Lucky you.
yeah, it's the annual conference of browser and standards developers. Really great to like chat with all the people from Mozilla and Apple and from the people from all kinds of companies that use the web and come to be involved in the standards. Um, but the way I see view transitions today is that they're constrained. They're great. They're a lot more freeing than we could do before, but they're still constrained in that they're uh, the document, the whole document, and nothing but the document. They call it. Like you have this full page transition of the whole document. So, and we see people using it for different things today. For example, sorting lists in an animated way,
Hmm.
uh,
So so
animated
basically
left.
basically what you're saying is if I have even in the context of the same page, if I have two distinct states, like we were talking before in the context of Wix, that I want to do some sophisticated hover animation, but not just, let's say, moving something, but actually changing the content that is shown. Why not be able to use view transitions for something like that? Is that what you're saying?
Well, you can do it today, but it freezes the whole page while you do it, and you can't do simultaneous ones.
Hmm.
So it would behave as if your whole page is transitioning, and you would be transitioning a part of the page.
So currently it's an all or nothing sort of a thing.
It's an all or nothing sort of thing. Also, in terms of choosing which elements participate, you choose it based on the CSS folder of the whole document. And we want to enable to kind of tag when you start a transition, kind of choose which transition are you actually going to run, and only select elements that participate in that transition. And so we want to allow those things, but the most important thing right now is cross document. Yep.
And I'm guessing the second most important thing, or maybe actually the first most important thing, is getting better cross browser support.
Yes, so we have a positive standards position from Mozilla and Apple on this. And we can't build it for them.
You personally have done things inside WebKit, as I recall.
Yes, I have. I worked full time on WebKit a long time ago, and also implemented standards inside WebKit as a freelance, like paint timing, which was charted by Wikipedia a couple of years ago. Um, so it can be done, but um, it's not what we're doing right now. We hope to empower the other browser engines to do it by themselves rather than us building the whole web just in 3 different engines.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm
But
looking at Can I Use right now, and there's a lot of red.
Yeah, it's definitely Chrome only right now.
well,
Also,
Chrome and Edge, I would assume.
yeah,
Yes,
Chromium.
Edge as well.
Uh, the thing is, it's also very easy to progressively enhance it.
Hmm.
Like you can use a feature, and if you don't have the JavaScript call to start a view transition, you just go directly to the next state that will just work.
Yeah, you just don't get the fancy, cute animation. Instead, it just switches between the pages or whatever, right?
Yeah, it was very important for us to think about progressive enhancement the whole way through for this. So that people can build it into their web pages, and then it would magically start working in browsers once they implement it.
In case any one of our listeners doesn't know what progressive enhancement means, it, and again, feel free, Nom, to correct me if I'm wrong, but basically it means that you can enhance the functionality with more sophisticated APIs, usually JavaScript related. But if those APIs aren't there, don't exist, or you just for some reason don't use them, then you fall back to something that is simpler, but still very much works.
Something like that, yes. That it basically means also that you can have different levels of styling on top of your content.
In
And
this case, styling, it could also be
yeah,
functionality.
right, functionality or styling, and you can have different layers based on what capabilities or preferences your users or user agents browsers have, um, and you don't break the whole thing just because some feature is not available.
And obviously, when you're doing something like that, like the view transition, you should respect the use reduced animations or whatever.
Oh, yeah. So there is a CSS media query prefers reduced motion. That's what you mean.
Yes.
So we don't respect it by default. It's really up to the web developer to do that.
Hmm.
The reason is not every transition is motion, for example. Um, and what reduced motion is a content decision, content and design decision. It's not really up to the browser to decide that the whole transition should be um, off when prefers reduced motion is on. Maybe you're just crossfading, as far as we know.
And this whole animation thing, I assume, is like most stuff CSS is implemented as much as possible on the GPU, which means
Mhm.
that it should be silky smooth even on mobile devices and consume relatively little battery, etc., all the good stuff.
I would say performance-wise, there is a one big gotcha, which is don't over capture. Like we saw that in early pieces of the API that people put those view transition names on a lot of elements and capture a
Hmm.
lot of them, and that is expensive to do. Like it that can get like a bit frozen if you overdo it. Um, so yes, but also need to take care, like with everything in performance.
Yeah, and also overdoing animations is usually a bad idea.
Yeah, from a UX perspective, really, the kind of things we saw people do with this. The main three animation that we kind of saw from partners starting to work with this and from demos. One is like just full page animations, like very basic slides or whatever. And the other one was going to call it product expand, like moving from a list of products in an e-com site to a single product and expanding the product image and title. It's a very, or from a playlist to a song. That product expand thing is very, very common in all the demos we saw. The third one was like list sorting.
And I think that it's not just a visual nicety. I think that there's an actual UX aspect here because when you click, like you said, on a particular product, and that product responds to your click, and it's very clear which product you're transitioning to, that definitely provides UX value from my perspective.
Yes, there are a lot of UX pitfalls in making it confusing, but if you have a good mental model of direction and of relationship between the different states, and you you apply that to your animations, there are a lot of opportunities there beyond just like, oh, this is cool.
Now, if I take a slightly higher view, unless there are more technical details you want to discuss in this context, but if I look at it from a higher perspective, it's really interesting to see how in this context there's like the standards work, of really being able to specify, what the APIs look like, what the behavior exactly should be, and doing it in a way so that when browsers implement it, and even though each one of them implements it, totally separately using different programming languages, data structures, and whatnot, but obviously by different developers, the end users all experience the same behavior. So there's this standards part, and then there's obviously the implementation part. I mean, standard is all nice and good, but if it's not implemented, it's not nothing.
Mhm.
So, can you talk a bit about, how you balance these sort of things? Because I know that, like you said, standards are where you're at. So how do you balance this with the work that you do with the developers in both inside Google and, maybe also outside?
So I don't work on this alone. We're in a team, and we're all participating and discussing internally and externally how the API should work, and finding out places where, oh, this is kind of more difficult to implement, or this doesn't make sense in the model of how this works, or whatever. So this is all done with a team of very good engineers from the Chromium side who work on this, and getting input whenever we get it from implementers of Mozilla and Mozilla of Gecko and WebKit. So you can say this whole thing is a conversation. And I bring my own, like, I don't know, my own unique stance on it, my own unique background on it, from being a web developer in the past, from working on standards in several fields, from knowing some things about about WebKit, especially working with the other browser vendors, working on Chromium on another project, um, and the other developers in the team bring also the know-how of what they need to do next, and like how long it's going to take, how complicated things are on the Chromium side, and the whole thing becomes a conversation in the CSS working group. Everything is done by consensus, so we have to reach consensus in the end of how this should work.
And don't you actually ever miss the coding part?
Um, Actually, no, but first of all, I do write code in terms of like writing an example and using it, etc. But writing production code on the other project I work on in web performance, I'm writing the Chromium code. It's a better balance for me at this point to be more like 70-30 standards versus Chromium code. I feel like Chromium code requires a lot of focus, like a lot of concentration.
Well, it is C++.
Yeah, C++, a lot of memory management, very complicated tests, very long builds, like, as in, you know, uh, 20 minutes sometimes. Um, it's not the same as web.
Get an M2.
It's all down on the cloud, distributed.
I'm joking.
Yeah, my M1, it will take 8 hours, 10 hours.
So let me ask you a couple questions, Noam, just
Sure.
about browser development itself. One, I was listening to another podcast, and I forget which one and who the guest was, but she had mentioned that in the world of developers that actually work on browsers, and implement all the standards in browsers, is small enough that they could all fit in a large elevator, and if something happened to that elevator, we'd be in a world of hurt. Like, it's a pretty small community of developers that actually work on browsers and implementing all this stuff for us to use as front end developers. So
Sure.
is that true? Is that how would you judge the size of the actual browser developer community?
Well, it would be a very crowded elevator, I'd say that.
Right.
But I would say people who work in browsers in total would be in the hundreds,
Mm-hmm.
whereas
Okay.
like 80% of them in Chrome.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know numbers. Just like Yeah, it's a big group from Chrome.
Hmm.
Yeah, for years there have been claims that Apple is underinvesting in browser development. It's really nice to find. I'm still upset that they're not allowing other browsers on iOS, but at least they're investing much more significantly in their own browser.
Yeah,
Yeah, Jen Simmons seems to have really driven a lot since she's been over there. I know her name from when she was in the Drupal world many years ago, and everything I've seen, and maybe this isn't accurate, but just my observations since she's been there, it seems that things have really picked up a lot from the WebKit from the Safari side.
yeah. Jen is also a very visible member, but
Hmm.
there are several key people from the standards community that Apple hired. I'm very happy about it to see um, to have lively discussion with the other browser vendors on features is really great. Like sometimes the Chrome echo chamber is not it's not
Exactly.
something we want internally. Like we would rather it happens sometimes because nobody's answering, not because it's what we want.
Hmm.
But to your question, it is a small group. It's also from those people who work on browsers, how many know the internals like really well? It's a much smaller group.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's a small niche. I'm happy to be part of it.
So then the other question is, Dan was mentioning your past. Both of you were mentioning your past experience. You had actually been a web developer, and then you've taken that and moved into the browser world, the standards world. How many would you say, or what's your estimation of how many people that actually work on browsers have actual front end web development experience? Somebody who knows, okay, I'm implementing this. This is the headaches I've dealt with as a web developer, as compared to people that just like tools and think, oh, this would be really great, but really don't have the familiarity with how they would actually use it from a web development standpoint.
Very, very few.
Very few that don't. So you'd say most of the browser
Very
developers have web front end
no,
experience. They've
no.
actually used it, or the other way around.
I didn't. Uh, I wasn't doing a double negative.
Okay.
That's a triple negative. Anyway, uh, uh, most browser developers don't have significant web development experience. It's kind of a different discipline. And there are some people that are more in the DevRel part of things that kind of try to bridge the gap. Like Jake
Hmm.
Archibald was one of them, Jen Simmons, um, etc. There are a lot of people that are kind of in between. Uh, but I think I would like to see more of that browser
Yeah.
development community. But I try to bring that aspect myself as much as I can. That's also part of why I kind of rotated between browser and web development.
Just sort of keep your feet in both worlds and being able to understand.
Kind of keeping it real in a way.
Hmm.
Um, I, I think it's also why I joined Wix at the time. Like before that, I never did a big web project in terms of production, in terms of something that really reaches millions of users in real time. That's like uh, what was drawing, what was attractive to me at going to a web company. Like when you develop browsers, you have releases. It's not like that. It's like you have releases that go through like much slower. Everything is much slower.
Yeah,
But
it's really funny that the people on whom the whole web is built are not web developers, and the way in which they develop and push out the software that they create is very much not the way in which web applications are distributed.
Yeah, to me, I think of it almost like I guess an example is a startup they're going to develop some platform and think, oh, this would be great, but they don't do any market research to say, would anybody even use this if we built this great tool? And then they go under because from their standpoint, yeah, this would be a great tool, but in reality, nobody wanted it or needed it, at least at that time. So, but yeah, I mean, I've been on both sides of things where I've been the developer using tools and I've been on the back end one, creating the tools and think this would be great. And so being able to, have your skill set and bridge that divide is certainly uh, a large plus.
So, oh, go on now.
I would say though that relatively this is not as much of a problem as in other professions. Let's say you're building a tool for dentists and you're not a dentist. Like right in this case, the tools we're building are at least accessible for us to use in a meaningful ways. In a meaningful web, the web is accessible for everyone, so it's also accessible to people who are not professional web developers. So in that sense, it's not as bad as in other type of software.
I'm actually extremely thankful to the engineers working on the platform itself. So first of all, I'm not as certainly not as much as you, but I'm somewhat exposed to them because I'm an invited expert on the W3C Web Performance Working Group. So I'm less exposed to the actual developers writing the code, but at least I'm exposed to the standards process. But beyond that, again, if we are talking about performance for a minute, if I'm looking at the graph of how performance has improved in recent years, then it seems as if performance has in terms of websites that have good core web vitals, that the amount has more than doubled over the past 2 to 3 years. But in reality, it's mostly thanks to the platform. In fact, if we take the improvements in the platform out of the equation, I think the line, well, if in at large, not for specific technologies, but across the board, the line has pretty much stayed the same. So yes, the the C++ developers are killing it, and I really and I wish that the JavaScript developers were doing as well. And I'm saying that as a person predominantly working in JavaScript and TypeScript, and not hardly any, if at all, in C++.
I'd say if we're going to performance land, that actually frameworks today are a lot faster than they were, a lot more
Oriented.
performance oriented and aware than they were. I think the main I trace a lot of websites now to find what's making them slow. I'd say the main problematic player in the performance world today is not so much frameworks or JavaScript developers of apps, but rather the third parties.
The marketing people.
Yeah, there are a lot of sluggishness and responsiveness issues from that sort of thing. Cookie consent stuff, ad brokering, all that, and we're working with a lot of those to raise awareness to that, because many times what happens is that you build your great websites, you went to all the Twitter feeds to find out the best ways to avoid multiple renders in your React app, and you use all the fancy new React servers components, and then you just put in a JavaScript file from some third party because that's your way to make money, and then the whole thing you did is meaningless. Like that's what's taking your time.
Yeah, for us at the Next Insurance, we are loading quite a significant amount of third-party scripts and pixels, and it is what it is. we actually need most of them, if not all of them. And it for us, we basically were forced to use Party Town, and that dramatically improved our INP score. So, we are ahead of INP becoming an official core vital. Again, we spoke about this um, with Barry Pollard a few weeks back. And, this made a much bigger impact than any improvement that we've done inside our own code. So I'm totally in agreement with you on that. I can say I definitely by the way, to our listeners, I definitely recommend checking out Party Town if you're using a lot of pixels. But do take into account that it is far from trivial to get it to work properly.
All right, so we're sort of hitting the end of our time here, so we'll wrap up and move to picks. Before we do that, Noam, is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you wanted to throw in real quick?
I think we're good.
I want to make one observation before we finish. I think that view transition is yet another example of several super exciting things that are taking place in CSS land. It seems that in especially in the past year, a lot of the advancements in the platform have been around CSS related things. So view transition, container queries, um, nested CSS. I'm sure I'm missing some stuff. Um, a lot of there are even some additional things that haven't landed yet, like the ability to kind of position things relative to each other. I'm forgetting the technical term for it.
Anchor positioning.
Anchor positioning.
Yeah.
And again, if I'm thinking about the work that we did at Wix, that would have simplified things so much, like getting rid of 80% of Wix's code, more or less,
Yeah.
with a few CSS tags, one if and when it actually works. So I'm super excited about a lot of the things that are being introduced in the platform in the context of CSS.
All righty. Well, thanks, Noam, for coming and talking to us about this as someone who is more CSS challenged or fancy stuff challenged in the front end. This would be something definitely worth playing with. Actually make my stuff look really good. So we'll move on to picks. Picks are part of the show where we get to talk about anything we want to talk about within reason, of course, and FCC guidelines. So could be tech, could be non-tech, could be whatever you want. Since AJ's talked so much this episode, we'll let him go first. You got anything for us, AJ?
Yes, I've got 1.5 things, I think. So I went to see Gran Turismo and I was very surprised because I was expecting it to be kind of a cheap action flick in the way that let's say, I mean, Transformers is kind of in its own category of bad, but I was just I was just kind of expecting like normal whiz bang stuff. And instead what I got was Rocky Race Car Edition. And I loved it. And I don't know that I loved Rocky. I don't even know if I've seen Rocky, but you kind of get like Rocky is a male drama. And that's what Gran Turismo is. It's not really a video game / gamer movie. It's not it's just not it's not what I expected. I was just kind of seeing something to pass the time, and then both of us we ended up just really, really loving it. And so I don't want to make it sound too good because then you go and you see it and you're like, oh, it wasn't that great. But just from the trailer, I thought, okay, it'll be an all right movie. And instead what I found was it was a really, really good movie that was so focused on the plot and the story and the character development that they couldn't have gotten a PG-13 rating, and except for that they just had to throw in a random F word in the middle of it for no reason, because otherwise it might have been G, because it was like just about the story. It was just about the hero's journey, and I really liked it. So I'll pick that. And then I mentioned before I've been listening to the Susan Venker podcast, which is she's a relationship coach. Her slogan is something like "Be countercultural." She's like a feminist. And then there's a similar woman that I uh, was listening to as well, Allison Armstrong. And there's some men also, but I think that it's a little bit, there's some value in hearing these things from women, I guess. And it's been really good, and I've taken some tips and uh, seen an improvement in the quality of my marriage over the past couple of weeks, and hope that that continues. It's nice to feel closer and get some of that man brain woman brain stuff a little better understood, so that natural conflict that occurs can be not not so confusing.
Yeah, when you said Gran Turismo, I started thinking Clint Eastwood. That was out a few years, but that's Gran Torino, I think. So, but they're both very grand, I guess. All right, Dan, what do you got for us?
Well, so I think in the last podcast that we recorded, my pick was about the whole TypeScript versus JavaScript kerfuffle, and Twitter/X not being content with just one kind of shitstorm, pardon my French, decided to start a couple of new ones. So another one was the whole recent thing about Bun versus Node.
Oh,
Bun 1.0 was released, and by the way, this is a great point to remind everybody that UAJ had an amazingly great interview one-on-one with the Bun creator slash main developer a
That
few
was
weeks back.
Yeah, that was really really good. I really enjoyed that. I was sad you guys weren't there, but we had a really good show.
Yeah, it was definitely great. The I said that on the one hand I was really sad that I couldn't participate. On the other hand, it was really great then that I could watch it, or given that I didn't see it before live. Yeah, so yeah, I highly recommend for people, anybody who might even consider using Bun to actually go and listen to that. But anyway, the point was that Bun one came out, and a lot of people that didn't really look at Bun before started looking at it, and people started tweeting about it or Xing about it, whatever you call it. And I remember the one in particular where some person basically said, does, after using Bun, does nobody else even care about performance? Because all her tests using Bun were so much faster than those same tests that she did using Node. Now the thing is that it got a lot of Node maintainers really upset. Now, before you say
Good.
anything a lot, yeah, I thought you'd say that, but do take into account that a lot of these Node maintainers are, they're not getting paid. They're
Which is the
doing the
problem.
and so you've got this guy doing thankless job of trying to get Node to work faster and doing it in his free time, getting absolutely zero appreciation, zero pay, and then all of a sudden getting shit, all this shit dropped on his head on Twitter, like you don't actually care about performance because Bun is killing you. And it's an interesting discussion of why Bun is able to be that much faster than Node. I'm not going to go there, we don't have the time for it. But a lot of those Node maintainers were basically saying the something along the lines of, F you, if you don't appreciate what we're doing, then we just won't do it anymore. And that's certainly not what we want to happen. We don't want all the node maintainers to basically abort. So yeah, so that thing happened. But yeah, I
Well,
definitely think that having Bun as an alternative is overall definitely a good thing.
and
Uh,
Bun does have money, and Node
yeah, it's
doesn't.
VC funded, exactly.
And but Node was the same way, but Node just had so many community issues, and so I think it's well, I think Bun is great. I'm really excited to see where it takes us. I don't care if Node dies because, well, it was never really that good, other than that it was just exponentially better than everything else. For as much as that can make any sense.
It's also the fact that things can be done better
Yes, yes,
when
yes,
you're starting from scratch, and
and all of the
and
history.
backward compatibility is less than an issue. Bun did make certain architectural decisions that have backward compatibility implications. You can't always just use it. It's great when you can, but sometimes you can't. It's interesting. Certainly it's shaking things up. So that's my first pick. My second pick is, you know what? I know, Norm, that you're short on time, so I'll skip my other picks, hand over to you, and then I'll come back to me later on.
Yeah, I have to drop. I'm sorry, but my pick is in honor of Chuck. My pick is the state of Utah because they allow Zoom weddings, and I we had our big wedding a while back, but we never made it official. And now with in Israel, it's all like difficult and irritating. So being able to do it with Zoom by the state of Utah in a totally official way is a plus one for Utah. So
Interesting.
yeah,
All right. Well, thanks, Noam.
that's
If you need to drop, that's
I
good.
do.
I can see your door opening behind you. I've had mine open
Yeah.
twice here during this
All right.
recording, so I
Bye,
get that.
Norm. Thank you very much.
Bye bye. Thanks everyone.
So I'll
Uh,
resume. I'll resume my picks because I do have a bit more. So as if that whole bun versus node thing was not enough, we then got this whole issue around Unity licensing. I don't know if you've heard that one. So Unity, for those who don't know, is one of the leading 3D engines used in a lot of games to do all the cool rendering stuff. Then you can just put in the game logic, and somebody else can deal with all the heavy lifting of the 3D scenes and whatnot. And they made a very significant licensing change, and they even made it even more significant by making it retroactive. So it impacted anybody who's ever used Unity. Even if you're using some older version and you thought you were okay with it, it still applies to you. And the change that they made was that effectively you need to pay them for every download. So it's not even for every user. It's not for registered user. It's not for somebody even playing with the game. It's enough that somebody downloaded the game and you need to pay them a licensing fee. Now, think what this does to people who are using some sort of a freemium model, for example, of letting people play for free, but then buy an upgrade. Well, all of a sudden you pay for that. You need to pay Unity for that free version, or if you're creating some sort of an open source thing, I don't know. Or for example, you have a competitor that annoys you, then just create a bot that downloads their game a million times and get them and have them go bankrupt. So now it seems that they're kind of backpedaling on that because people basically told them that they should go f themselves with that thing. And hopefully this whole thing gets resolved, because replacing the engine inside your game is not an easy undertaking. It's not something that you can just rip and replace because they lost sense or something like that. And my final pick is that it kind of gets, I'm looking at all these technological arguments and kerfuffles and whatnot, and it's kind of difficult for me to get all in an uproar about them when here in Israel we've got a debate going on whether or not we should remain a democracy. That seems to be, you know, somewhat more significant. Oh, yeah, that and the ongoing war in Ukraine. Support the people of Ukraine. And those are my picks for today. Over to you, Steve.
Yeah, well, in regards of what you were talking about with Unity, I've been reading all that, see some of the articles on Hacker News and so on. And this is sounds along the lines of what I think it was Red Hat did with one of their Linux distros recently. They changed the licensing. And I don't remember all the details. I'd have to go back and look it up. But as soon as I saw this thing with Unity, I'm like, oh man, somebody else is doing the same thing, trying to change the licensing. And with the Red Hat case, I think it was where somebody forked it and said, okay, we're going to create our own community edition, and applied to Apache to become part of the nonprofit through that whole structure. So seems, I don't, hopefully there's not a third one coming down the pike, since things supposedly happen in threes. But I keep hearing more and more about stuff like this where large entities that own an open source product are changing the licensing and really harming those people downstream, for sure. And obviously with anything, there's going to be two sides of the story. Maybe it's, financial issues and they need to squeeze more money out. But it seems to me that sometimes people don't really think through some of the implications of the changes they make when they have so many dependent users, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
My picks. So a couple weeks ago, I mentioned a show I'd been looking forward to, and it wasn't out. And then in the process of that, I caught another show that I really liked called The Spy, that was based on Ailey Cohen. And so the show that I was looking forward to on Netflix called Spy Ops was released on September 8th. And I've watched a few episodes of it. It's really, really quite interesting. They're all true histories, true stories of different ops from different spy agencies. Probably one of the first episodes has to do with MI6 from Britain and how they got at Oleg Gordievsky. I always forget his last name. In 1985, right from under the nose of the KGB. And it's quite an interesting story. It involves a woman spy changing her baby's diapers to throw off the scent of a spy dog that was about to catch him in the trunk right before they went into Finland and crossed over the border into Finland. Really quite ingenious. But the other one that I wanted to see and was fascinating to watch was the story of Mossad, Israel's agency, and how they went after the members of Black September, who killed all the 9 Israeli athletes during the 1972 Munich Olympics.
Yes.
By
very sad. Very, very sad story.
Kidnapping them. Yeah, it's an interesting story. That there's actually 2 episodes dedicated to it, and one is the bombing or the kidnapping itself and how everything fell apart in Munich when they were trying to rescue them. And then the second part is how over the subsequent years, Mossad went after the members of Black September. And the saddest part, and I didn't realize this till I watched this episode, and hopefully it's not too much of a spoiler, is how bad they screwed up going after the last guy.
Yeah.
And they got the innocent guy in
a waiter,
Denmark.
I believe.
Yeah, Denmark. He was a musician. And what's fascinating is how the guy who got my mistake, his brother was a musician. Now he came into the story later, became an envoy for UNICEF or the UN, I can't remember, in the late 90s when all this, a lot of this was resolved. But really great stories, fun to watch, especially since they're real and they're not, not just made up spy stories.
You might also want to see there was a movie made. To be honest, I didn't see it, so I don't know if it was good or not. But if that's kind of your jam, there's an interesting movie around how they captured Adolf Eichmann in South America and smuggled him to trial in Israel.
I've watched that movie and I actually have the book. So The book is called Eichmann in My Hands, and it's written by the guy, I forget his name, Dan something, who told all about how they did it. And then the movie was actually fairly accurate because I watched the movie after the book, and it's called The Man Who Captured Eichmann. But really, those are really great stories too. They're really great stories that I've always liked. So now into more lighthearted stuff. We will go with the dad jokes of the week to wrap up today's episode. So recently I went to my doctor and he told me that I have high blood pressure and short-term memory loss. I'm just glad I don't have high blood pressure. The other day I called my local dairy and asked them to deliver milk to me so that I could take a bath in it because milk baths are supposed to be really good. And they said, "Would you like it pasteurized?" I said, "No, just enough for up to my neck."
Oh man.
And then finally, I decided to jump into the book authoring business, and I'm writing a book on reverse psychology. Please don't buy it.
That's a good one, actually.
So those are the dad jokes and picks of the week. Thank you to Noam for coming on. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to stay, but for a front-end developer like me, I'm really looking forward to being able to use that view transition API.
Yeah, I'm really
For sure.
excited about these things. It's a lot of good, like I said, a lot of good things happening in CSS land and things that are actually usable
Yes.
and worthwhile.
Yes, for sure. Thank you, Dan and AJ, for joining me. And we will talk to y'all next time on JavaScript Jabber.
Bye.